Our speaker for today is Haviv Gur. He is a veteran Israeli journalist who serves as the senior analyst for the Times of Israel, which has become the most popular news website in the world over the last couple of weeks. At least the increase. The increase is extraordinary. He has covered Israeli politics, foreign policy, educational system, and Israel's relationship with the diaspora since 2005. He's reported from over 20 countries, and he served as Director of Communications for the Jewish Agency, our home campus here, which is Israel's largest NGO. He has become a go-to voice for anyone looking for insight into the current conflict. You can hear him regularly on Dan Senora's podcast, Call Me Back, and it's a privilege to have him here today at Shalem College. Haviv.
Thank you. Thank you, Russ. Everybody can hear me? Is this on? Is it on for the video? Is that, okay, because I don't hear myself like booming from anything. All right, so we're just speaking with our regular voices here. Hello. Good afternoon to you all. I'm here because I want to tell you about Palestinians. And we're going to do that next week. But before I tell you about Palestinians, and specifically one thing that I want to talk about with the Palestinians, I don't know if you know, there's a war on, you might have heard. And that war is rooted, more than anything else, in their theory of me, of us Jews generally, but mostly Israeli Jews. They have a vision of us. They have an interpretation of us. It is 100 years old. It is deep. It is thoughtful. It is serious. It's not stupid. It's not shallow. It just happens to be wrong. And it's not wrong because my story is true and my narrative is true. It's diagnostically incorrect. It says things about me that didn't happen, that were not my historical experience. It misunderstands my psychology. I'm not talking about my history says this, your history says that. There are a lot of facts in the world. Which narrative is closer to the objective truth? We're not going anywhere near that kind of discourse. They claim something about my psychology that isn't true about my psychology. They claim something about my experience that isn't true about my experience. And on the altar of that interpretation, they have destroyed their own cause. And that is not what we're going to talk about today. Because before I tell you what the Palestinians misunderstand about Israeli Jews, I have to tell you what Israeli Jews actually are. And before I tell you what Israeli Jews actually are, raise your hand if you're from America. Okay. This is no Canadian that snuck in. Oh, there it is. I have to tell you what you are, so that we can branch off from what you are to what we are, so that we can then get to what they think we are and why they're missing something very big and important. And why that's the heart of this war, and the heart of 100 years of war. Everybody with me? Okay. So I'm going to do a classic Israeli thing. I'm going to stand in front of Americans and tell them about Americans. Okay? You're welcome. Not everybody is as privileged as you are to be hearing from an Israeli about yourselves. Okay. Israelis are the Jews of history, as opposed to you guys. Don't be insulted. We're all being honest here. We're starting with pictures of dead children. I apologize. A little bit of history. Our story, our shared story as Jews. I'm assuming everyone here are Jews. If you're not Jews, this is going to be super interesting about Jews, okay? I don't know everybody. I don't know who you all are, okay? But the story here is the story of Jews. In 1881, an anarchist group called the Black Hand, which is a cool name for an anarchist group if you're ever going to establish one, assassinates Tsar Nicholas II, Alexander II. Tsar Alexander II was this great reformist czar of the Russian Empire. He abolished serfdom in 1861, big reformer. Was going to establish a parliament. And they assassinate him, and his son takes power, Alexander III. His son is very angry at his father. His father disrespected his mother, in his view, by marrying someone shortly after his mother died. And he believes that the reason his father was assassinated was his father's great reforms, or that played a major role. And so Alexander III begins a reactionary crackdown throughout the Russian Empire. And in the framework of that reactionary crackdown, not caused by the Tsarist regime, but as part of a broader response to the assassination of Alexander II and the inauguration of basically a new culture of politics under Alexander III, waves of what we call pogroms begin to sweep through Eastern Europe. It begins in the southern Russian Empire, which is today basically Western Ukraine, Moldova. Jews all through these vast lands face over the next 40 years just random groups of the public who walk into the streets, march through the streets screaming at Jews, find Jewish homes, burn those Jewish homes, drag Jews into the streets. In some places, very few are killed, but a whole lot are terrorized. In other places, vast numbers are killed. Over the course of those 40 years, 1881 to 1920, estimates put the number of separate, distinct, discernible pogroms at 1,300. 1,300 pogroms over 40 years means it's a normative experience. All Jews expect it, know it's coming. The number of deaths may have reached as high as 250,000 Jewish civilians. Most of that is in World War I and in the Russian Civil War, which is the sort of multi-sided war that takes over the former Russian Empire after the October Revolution in 1917. Death, pogrom. Jews are kicked out of universities. The May Laws of 1882, passed by Alexander III, almost as one of the first things he does in power, further constrict where Jews can live, where Jews can study, what jobs they can hold. Jews are being told by the society around them, bottom up by the pogromists and top down by the May Laws and by the new regime, that they do not belong. The Jews start fleeing in their millions. 2.5 to 3 million Jews flee. So many Jews flee westward to the Austro-Hungarian and German empires that they cause a diplomatic crisis. Because the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans say, hey, we don't want your Jews. You got a Jewish problem, you take care of it. Why do we need this Jewish problem? So much so that they deny the Russian Empire in the early years a credit line that it desperately needs to fund, don't worry about it, the war with the Ottomans, etc., etc. Russia actually faces real world costs. Millions of Jews are fleeing, but they don't stop in Vienna. They don't stop in Budapest. They keep going. 2.5 million of them get to America. There we go. Officials in Poland, officials in Romania, officials in St. Petersburg talk to each other, write about how we get the Jews to leave. The goal of these policies for decades, for about 60 years, right up until the Holocaust, is to figure out how to get the Jews to leave. We understand that, right? Anybody ever feel like there's too many Jews around? Every day, right? It's probably a little higher, by the way, than that last number. So who are you? In the mid-19th century, 1840s, a few 100,000 Jews, probably 300,000 Jews maybe 200,000, land in America, German speakers. A lot of them land in the Midwest. Anybody here from Cincinnati? Or St. Louis, or Milwaukee, a Midwestern city with an opera? Why are you from a Midwestern city with an opera? How come little Midwestern towns have operas? Anybody? We talked about this on the podcast with Russ. Why didn't we? I think we did. No, we did. Folks, the reason that there is a tradition in the Midwest of every town worth its salt having an opera is that they were all massively populated by Germans in the middle of the 19th century. And everywhere Germans go, they make opera. Not anymore, by the way, but these are good Germans from the 19th century. They had established opera houses. Jews went with this German migration. And they established, for example, anybody here know about Reform Judaism? You ever heard of Reform Judaism? Okay, what's Reform Judaism's rabbinical school? HUC. Where is HUC's headquarters? Isn't that weird? Why would it be in Cincinnati, Ohio? What? What? Yeah, I know, because they're in Cincinnati, Ohio. But why for 145 years, or whatever it was, were they in Cincinnati, Ohio? Because of that German immigration in the middle of the 19th century. Great, fantastic. Then come the pogroms. And then a community of maybe 250,000 Jews, German-speaking, middle-class, educated, already second-generation Americans, maybe third, suddenly has to absorb 10 times its number in essentially, to a large extent, Yiddish-speaking Ukrainian peasants. Okay? Desperately poor people. And how do you do it? Jewish communities used to fundraise in a very simple way. Every institution in the community, every day school, every old age home, every cemetery, every Chaver Kadisha, every institution of the community would have a guy, the fundraiser, who'd walk around homes with little boxes, with little envelopes, and ask for money. That was the fundraising. Walk around the Jewish neighborhood and ask for dollars. What's the problem? That sometimes the day school had a great fundraiser, and the old age home had a terrible fundraiser, and so the day school would have lots of money, and the old age home would have very little money. And if your community tends to be an older community, that's not a good thing, right? We didn't have enough money as a community of 250,000 to actually take care of 2.5 million poor people coming in over 40 years. And so what do they do to streamline and maximize the effect of every dollar? They establish the what? Courage. Opera is almost always the right answer, not in this case. They established the federation. Do you have a federation where you come from? All of you have federations where you come from. There's 150 of them, and they're all local. And what are they? Why are they called things like Jewish United Fund or Combined Philanthropies? Who did that? Who did that branding? Anyway, the point is, what are they? They are a committee, originally. They are a committee of all the institutions of the community that all come to the table together and all together fundraise and all together disperse the money in ways that allow that money to go exactly where it's needed because there isn't a dollar to spare. Because this small community is building this. All the tradition, the astonishing tradition of American Jewish philanthropy, the culture of belonging and giving and donating and taking part and civic participation, all of that stuff is born in this experience of this immigration, not just in the immigration itself, but in how a small community absorbs a large community. Okay? That's you. You with me? Okay. These are Russian Jews landing on the shores. Those are their American cousins calling them in. It got to the point where the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, established in this period to absorb these immigrants, there was a period in the US where you couldn't get off the boat in New York Harbor without a dollar bill, without a dollar's worth of money. So they knew you weren't sleeping in the street that night. So Hayas would go on to the boat and hand everyone a dollar, and they would get off the boat, and then there'd be a guy from Hayas on the other side of customs taking the dollar back. Just to get everyone off the boat, right? That's the experience that created the generation. You guys know about the Lower East Side? Anybody here know who Mel Brooks is? I don't know if he's still popular. Okay, so I'm obsessed with the 2,000-year-old man, right? If you aren't, you should be, and you should listen to the record, all four of them. He's making fun of his parents who are that generation of immigrants. Okay? That's the American Jewish experience. And this is where it gets deep. What American Jews discovered in America, after fleeing and having other Jews rescue them and absorb them into this community, is a Jewish experience unlike any Jew has ever experienced ever anywhere. American Jews discovered in America a society built on Protestant radical individualism. Trust me. That very, very strangely, very weirdly, unexpectedly, told American Jews, haltingly, with many problems, sometimes failing to do it, often failing to do it, but nevertheless told American Jews that unlike just about every other diaspora experience ever experienced by any Jew, they are American. They are home. This is a famous letter, August 21, 1790, by George Washington to the synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. The synagogue wrote him a letter, and in that letter, it was the classic letter. It was the letter that every Jewish community writes to every new king throughout Jewish diasporic life. The letter said, "Wow, you're amazing, you're handsome, you're tall, thank you so much for being our king. We are super loyal." I'm paraphrasing. And Washington wrote back a letter that no leader has ever written to Jews. No leader could ever write to Jews. He starts the letter, he comes back to it here, so I'm going to go with it. This is the part I like because it's funny. "It would be inconsistent with the frankness of my character, I'll be honest, not to avow that I'm pleased with your favorable opinion of my administration." What's he doing? He's making fun of them, I think. Don't tell anyone I said that. "And fervent wishes for my felicity." Now, maybe this is just gentlemanly politeness by a Virginia gentleman, but I also think that letter was a bit much, and he was a little bit offended by the outpouring of, what do you call it? What? The flattery. And he's saying that. And the reason I think he's saying that is this. It is now, they say this is going to be a country, a government of tolerance, of toleration. And he says, no, absolutely not. I refuse to tolerate you. Why do I refuse to tolerate you? It is now no more that toleration is spoken of as if it were the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. What do you mean I should tolerate you? What are you saying if you're saying I should tolerate you? It's my country and you're guests, right? But you're not guests. It's your country. Your rights are yours. They're not mine to give. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effectual support. Which gives to bigotry no sanction and to persecution no assistance is quoting the original letter from the community, but he doesn't acknowledge that he's quoting, so I think he knows this letter is going to be maybe remembered. I don't know. But what is he saying? Yeah, you can say it. Yeah, out loud.
You have nothing to worry about, so this flattery isn't necessary.
A, it's not necessary, but I think it even goes stronger than not necessary.
Tolerance implies that there are like multiple groups, and he's saying you're all equal or all American.
You're all here. But he's also saying, to think that I need to tolerate you is to misunderstand what's happening here. It's not just to misunderstand what's happening, it's to tell me you're just another king. You're just another European government. Whatever you call yourself, president. No, this is different. This is really different. This is an experiment no one's ever tried before, and we're going to make it work. You are not tolerated here. With all the caveats you know, which is that, America was not offering this to everybody in America at the time. But this is an expression of a new kind of relationship. The Jews arrive in America between 1881 and 1921. Millions of Jews arrive in America, and they immediately start building out this massive institutional universe that still exists to a large extent. 100 years later, the Federation system today is the second largest charitable network in America after the United Way. Both of them are in decline, but it's still the second biggest. It's billions of dollars. And that Jewish experience over the last 100 years, from let's say 1921 until today, is an experience of this. Folks, this was a promise. What's the promise of America to American Jews? that you're no longer in the diaspora. You are home. You are American. We are now in the world of liberal American democracy. You belong. You are safe. In the Russian Empire, you were not Russian. You were Jewish. By the way, in passports, including in communist times. Yeah.
My parents are from Russia, and they've spoken a lot about how in Russia they were Jews, but when they emigrated, they were now Russians.
And in America, you are utterly American. No one knows what it means for you to be anything but American. You want to also be Jewish? Great. You want to also be a mountain bike rider? Great. But you're American. That's a promise of an end to the diaspora. That's a promise of an end to the life contingent on others. It is no more that toleration is spoken of as if it were the indulgence of one class of people, that another should enjoy their inherent natural rights. Over those 100 years, wow, that did not develop well into this slide. That promise came true. And it didn't just come true. Making sure that promise comes true is the deepest anxiety at the heart of American Jewish life and culture. It is why American Jews are obsessed, no offense, with the black experience. It is why Heschel marched with King in Selma. It is why the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, the first draft, was written in the Religious Action Center of the Reform Movement in Washington. It is why the white kid killed in the lynches of the Freedom Riders was definitely going to be a Jewish kid. It is why the white people in the room at the founding of the NAACP were called Moskowitz. The Jews are obsessed with the black experience. Why? Connect the dots.
Similar to our own.
Bigger than that. In other words, they have empathy. No. They do have empathy. Jews are amazing. But, no, it's bigger. Yes?
If in the very country that you feel at home, they're treating another population like this, it's very easy to see things turning on you.
What is America? Is America the liberal promise? It had better be. Because what if it isn't? And where has the American liberal promise always, generation after generation, gone to die? The black experience. Whither goes black America, there goes America itself, there go the Jews. Everybody with me? 87% of black Americans black voters voted Obama. And the second highest group, at 84%, were the Jews. This is true across generations, because it is the litmus test of America. Folks, the promise of liberalism came true. You're always worried about it. You're always testing it. What's the trauma of the last 2 months for so many American Jews? Yeah. Failure of? Somehow, over on the liberal edge, illiberalism popped over and started talking to us about our being oppressors and our being, right? Somehow it came from it did a loop-de-loop. The illiberalism that might risk America not being what. And so folks, I went on a 10-day speaking tour in America. I came back 2 weeks ago. I have gone to 5 funerals. I have friends in the war. I have 2 brothers-in-law in the war in Gaza. I have to tell you, the American Jews I met were a lot more frightened than the Israeli Jews I left behind. The Israeli Jews feel like they have agency, strength, the ability to affect their world. American Jews are watching things happen that they don't understand and that risk everything, because everything is the American liberal promise. That's the homeland. It's not America. It's the America's liberal promise. Okay? You with me? Now let's talk about Israelis. Who are Israelis? Stop reading. No, I'm just kidding. You can read. Who are Israelis? In 1921, that 1921 right there, that's the important date. But it builds up. The world shuts its doors. Millions and millions of Jews are flowing westward. Nobody wants them. But they're not stopping. It's, by the way, not just Jews. There's a bill passed in Congress, a law passed by Congress right just in those years against Chinese immigration. The Chinese are coming over to work. And there's anti-Japanese sentiment, there's anti-Irish sentiment, there's anti-Italian sentiment. But the Jews are the most urgent. The Jews are the group that Congress meets to talk about most fervently, yes?
Are these acts in the US?
So the top one is Britain, the next three are America. In 1921, partly because they had just had this massive wave because of the Russian Civil War where 150, 200,000 Jews were killed, probably 150,000 Jews are killed. In 1921 alone, 110,000 people landed in New York Harbor, and they passed the Emergency Quota Act. The Emergency Quota Act takes the major countries that the Jews are coming from and pegs their allowed quotas to 3% of the 1910 census. And it cuts Jewish immigration from 110,000 in 1921 to 1924, 10,000. It cuts it by 90%. And then in 1924, they passed the full Quota Act, the Permanent Quota Act, and then they peg it to 2%. That's a 33% drop of the 1890 census. That's 2 million less Jews. Everybody with me? And then it drops by 1934, when the Nazis are already in power in Germany, to 2,700. America closes its doors to the Jews. America closes its doors to the Jews not because Europe is getting better. It closes its doors to the Jews even as Europe is getting worse. Even as Jews can't go to college in Romania. Even as the Poles in 1938 begin stripping citizenship away from Jews who aren't on Polish territory and leaving them stateless. Europe gets worse, and America closes its doors. And after America, each one with a different process, with a different time frame, all of it accelerates during the Great Depression, when there's a lot of worry about jobs being taken by immigrants, when jobs are very scarce. Canada, Australia, Brazil, Argentina, you name it, Jews can't get there anymore. And as the world closes its doors, this happens. I want you to see this carefully. You see this 37? That's the number of years that this column represents. Aliyah is immigration to the land of Israel. Immigration first to Ottoman Palestine, then British Palestine. What happens when the West closes its doors? In the 40 years when 2.5 million Jews land in America, 50,000 ever make it to Israel. 2%? I went into the humanities because I'm bad at math, but I think that's 2%. In 37 years, this hits about 60,000, probably about 90,000 came, 40,000 left. It's complicated, hard to quite follow. 50,000 is sort of the agreed upon consensus, or the median of the consensus of scholars. This is 37 years, 60,000 immigrants. And then 29 years, 400 and something thousand. 1919 to 1948 is the beginning of the major immigration. Because from 1919 to 1948, the Jews have nowhere to go. And they're still desperate to get out. And many of them don't want to go there because it's not a great place to go. The economy is small. There aren't a lot of jobs. They're still draining swamps or something. It's not. Anybody here ever think about making Aliyah and you're like, I don't know if I can handle the bureaucracy? Imagine 1923. Folks, 1935 alone, what we call the fifth Aliyah, 65,000 Jews in 1 year. 50,000 in 37 years, 65,000 in 1 year. By the way, every single one spoke German in 1935. 1948, Israel is founded. And then in 4 years, 650,000. What is this? What is this graph? What happened? Who are Israelis? Yeah.
Those who were betrayed by the West and Americans specifically.
Welcome to Israel. Where are the other Jews? Where are the Jews who didn't get rescued by the West, who didn't get into America, who didn't get to sit in New York and worry about the Holocaust? Where are the Jews who went through it? You've heard about the Holocaust. I'm just going to skip, okay? I want to talk about the after the Holocaust. World War II ends, and millions upon millions of people, there are estimates of 9 million, there are estimates of 17 million. I happen to like a book that claimed 15 million, so I'm going to go with that number. Millions upon millions of people are displaced. They're not in their homes. They end the war, they're prisoners of war, they're forced laborers, they fled into forests. Millions and millions of people. And they start going home. And by the end of 1945, there are 1 million people who are officially defined as DPs, displaced persons. They are in camps established for them in Germany, in Austria, a little bit in Italy. And these camps are run by the Allies, the Americans and the British. Of the million, 750,000 are non-Jews. There are two main groups. The first group is Nazi collaborators who can't go home because the Nazis have fallen and they'll be killed, especially, for example, in the Baltic states, where there were a lot of Nazi collaborators and the Soviets are now in charge and they're purging those countries. That's probably a good 300,000 of them are Nazi collaborators who would be killed if they went home. The second group is various other problems. In other words, Catholics from Poland. There's now basically a civil war on in Poland after the war, and it's just literally dangerous, and so they don't want to go home. And then there are the 250,000 Jews. A lot of Jews try to go home. We have records of Jews trying to go home to Vilna. They left messages on message boards at the synagogue, and then they kept moving. There were pogroms in Poland with people marching in the streets, telling the Jews who had just returned, "You're not welcome here. We were rid of you. Please go." And the Jews flee. And so there are 250,000 displaced people, and to displace Jews, and to settle them, to find a solution for them, to find a country for them. The Americans and the British established something called the International Refugee Organization, the IRO. The IRO goes to governments and says to them, hey, you're missing some workers. A lot of men died in the war. A lot of the economies that want to get back on their feet need working hands. Why don't you come and take these amazing workers who are desperate for jobs and desperate for passports? And about 40 governments come to the camps. And they go to the camps and they meet these displaced persons. And they hire them, and they take them in, and they give them passports, and they naturalize them, and they find them new homes. Every last pro-Nazi collaborator is taken within months. They tend to be well-fed. They tend to have gotten through the war healthy. They tend to be Protestant. They tend to be blonde. They tend to be Lithuanian and Estonian. Sorry to get specific. And every last one is taken. And then the next wave takes, what are you going to do? You're left with the Polish Catholics. Every last one is taken. And then they wrap up and go home. And all the Jews remain. If you end 1946 in a DP camp, you're a Jew who knows that you are literally unwanted just for work by anyone on earth. Truman, in desperation in 1945, asks Congress to lift the quotas. The quotas are still in place. America knows everything about Auschwitz, and the quotas are still in place. Congress refuses. Truman sends a guy named Earl Harrison. He's the dean of the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Oh, I already said that. In 1946, these are the immigration quotas. That's, by the way, how you do Jewish immigration, because there's no category Jew in American law. So you do by country of origin, and this way you keep them out. That's total from those countries. The Harrison Report. That's the first page of the Harrison Report. Earl Harrison goes to the camps, and he meets the Jews, and he writes a report. Among the things he says in the report, the Nazi guards, we stopped the extermination. That's a big deal, not a small thing. But you know, they're still living in Dachau and Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen. They're still living in those areas, in those camps. And yes, they have food. And you know what? They've opened 70 newspapers. Not by 1945, but by 1946. And soccer leagues. But they're still living in the camps without citizenship and without being allowed to go anywhere. And the Nazi guards, Harrison says, are replaced by RGIs, holding them in. That's Harrison's report to Truman. He goes to one camp and he gives a survey. And in the survey, he wants to find out where the Jews want to go. So he says, please list the top 5 places you want to go in the world. Not because he can send them there, but because it's good information to know when you're starting to negotiate. And in this particular place, 90% write Palestine on the first line. And then 90% write Palestine on the second line. And Harrison gets very annoyed, and he says, Jews are bad at surveys. And so he gives them another survey. And in that second survey, he says, except for Palestine, where would you go? And 20% write crematorium. What have the Jews of the DP camps understood?
They're not welcome anywhere else.
They never will be welcome.
Folks, it's over. We get it. It took you a lot of explaining, dear world, but we understood. We are clear. You don't have to explain to us again this one great thing that the world has told us. And all of that is to say that what Israelis are refugees, literal refugees. Palestinians don't know this about us. They kind of have a vague sense of our history, just like you kind of have a vague sense of your history, just like everybody kind of has a vague sense of their history 100 years ago. But they don't understand the extent to which Zionism is not an ideological movement. If you're a Zionist, please don't throw me out of the room. Hear me out a second. It's not nationalism. It is refuge. One of the reasons Palestinians don't know this about us is that we don't say it about ourselves. What do we claim happened? How do we claim Jews came here? Kam am ve'etchil lechet. A nation stood up or awoke and started to walk. We finally awoke to our true identity, and because of our great ideological connection to the land, which had always been there, it had always been there. We finally redeemed ourselves out of sheer willpower. I wish history could work that way. History doesn't work that way. Who are the Jews of Israel? They are the last desperate, decimated remnants of the Jewish communities of 60 countries. And I'll tell you a secret, don't tell anyone outside this room, except for whoever watches this on video. You can tell them. That's Zionism. It's okay that we're refugees, that we're rescue, that it's a project of rescue and not a national movement, because it's a deep project of rescue. That's Herzl. Herzl is that. Herzl is Zionism as rescue. Zionism is not a national movement. It's something bigger. And I'm going to try and say what it is, on one leg, as the Talmud says. What is Zionism, in fact, in truth? You ready? This is it. This is the secret of Zionism. If the non-Jews are watching, I hope they're not taking notes. All right, here we go. Zionism is a sociological analysis of modernity. Zionism says, obviously I'm paraphrasing and simplifying cartoonishly, I apologize. Zionism says the world is changing in the 19th century, profoundly. Industrialization, urbanization, people are living differently. At the beginning of the 19th century, you were living on a small farm in Bavaria with a village of 150 people you know. By the end of the 19th century, or even by the middle of the 19th century, you are living as an ant in the world's first apartment building in the heart of industrializing Frankfurt, with a single bathroom at the end of the hall for 25 families. That experience that people literally went through, that jarring, society-shattering, family-shattering, economy-changing, identity-shattering experience of industrialization, which, by the way, created communism, created the theory and the response and the social movements. That is changing how people think of themselves and their identities. People are organizing themselves out of small identities, maybe religious identities, and into new kinds of what scholars sometimes call mass societies. What's a mass society? I'm going to throw at you a jumble of words. Don't worry about it. Look them up on Wikipedia if they're exciting. Mass societies are societies of people you don't know, but you're part of. What is a German? I used to come from this village in Bavaria. I used to know what I am. I'm this guy from there. I used to have my own separate little accent. What's a German? Who are the Germans? I haven't met the Germans. Have you met the Germans? Not a German, the Germans. The Germans are an imagined national community. Imagine doesn't mean they don't exist. Imagine means they exist profoundly in our heads, right? Like armies don't actually exist. They are an agreement of a bunch of people to behave a certain way. Like money doesn't actually exist. It's an agreement of a bunch of people to behave. Everybody with me? These new mass societies are not interpersonal. They are imagined. They are huge. And they develop ideologies of nationalism in the 19th century that try and argue that they are deeply and profoundly not only real, but also organic, biological. Tribe. And in this world of new mass societies, in this shift from small agrarian, maybe religious identities to mass national identities of people I don't know, they develop these ideologies of nationalism that try and police the boundaries of these identities to firm them up and make sure that they stay strong. Everybody with me, or has this gotten really boring? Okay, here's Herzl's argument. You ready? This is why he's Herzl. It's not just Herzl, but let's just pin all of it on Herzl for the moment. We think, we Europeans in the late 19th century, that these new nationalisms are building up into a new liberal world. There are parliaments in more places than there were before. There's science in more ways than there ever has been before. People are figuring out subatomic particles. That's new. That's cool. We think we're in this age of progress and liberalism and rights and the expansion of the Jewish experience. What's the Jewish experience of emancipation? It's that I can leave the ghettoized existence of the East and I can move to Berlin and I can become part, Moses Mendelssohn, part of the intellectual elites of Berlin. I can live Albert Einstein's life, at least the first part of his life. Right? This new liberalism is a good thing. We're good. We found the solution to the Jewish problem. And what does Herzl say? What does Herzl say, guys?
Herzl thought that establishing a Jewish state would give dignity to the Jew and also would enable Jews to assimilate in the diaspora because present anti-Semitism would be gone forever.
But why can't they just assimilate without a Jewish state? What's the problem with this new mass society? Yeah.
They just, you'll never stop being a Jew to them, so you can't be German.
Folks, take time at some point in your life to read Mein Kampf. to read the Nazis on the Jews. It's the most extreme version of this problem, but it's so clear at the extreme. What's the Nazi problem with the Jews? Yeah.
They're racially different.
That's not the Nazi problem with the Jews. That's the Nazi problem with everybody. Right? The Nazis thought blacks and Japanese were inferior to them. But they weren't genocidally. We could enslave the Slavs. We don't have to murder every last Slav. Why do you have to murder every last Jew? Yeah.
Jews are like seen as these like despised. They have no nation. They have no real identity.
Sort of. It's even more than that. The Jews are more dangerous than that. Yes?
They were afraid of the Jews.
Why? How could you be afraid of the Jews?
They were so successful and like powerful and like strong in community.
Okay, the Jews did something even more dangerous than that.
Their own, to some degree, sovereignty. They were separate from everyone else. It wasn't like the other communities within a specific country where everyone was part of the country. They lived somewhat to some degree separate.
Which creates otherness. And folks, the Nazi fear of the Jews was that the Jews were a threat to Germanness. If Germanness is tribal and blood and ancient and biological, and we can measure it by testing your skull, and a Jew in the morning can be a German, and in the evening a Jew. If Albert Einstein could be the greatest scientist of the German world, and then take a boat to Jerusalem to found Hebrew University because he's a Jew, what is he doing? I am arguing that the boundaries of Germanness are hard. The membrane is impermeable. It is biology. It is real. And what is the Jew doing? He's popping in and out all the time. He's perforating the membrane of Germanness. If a Jew could be a German and something else, if you can have layers, you can't have absolute identity. And if you can't have absolute identity, what is the German? The Jews endanger Germanness. Blacks don't do that. Southeast Asians don't do that. And so the Jews have to actually be destroyed. Herzl doesn't imagine the Holocaust, but he does imagine catastrophe. This is from his diaries. It's in, by the way, a fundraising meeting with the Rothschilds. Okay, so fundraising meetings always go slightly differently from regular conversation, but still. He says to them, they're going to come for us. There's going to be a catastrophe. The catastrophe is the word he uses. That's his word. Will it be a revolutionary expropriation from below? Who's he talking about? Communists. Or a reactionary confiscation from above. Will they chase us away? Will they kill us? I have a fair idea. It will take all these forms and others. This new liberal modernizing Europe cannot contain us. By the way, not just us. It can't contain any minorities. It's not a theory of Jews. It's a theory of modernization. And therefore, the only option we have is to get out. And therefore, it's worth considering. He didn't want it, but it's worth considering Uganda. By which he actually meant a part of Kenya today. But that's not the point. Why? Because we have to get the Jews out. A catastrophe is coming. Yeah.
Is he worried about the Germans or the world in general?
Everybody. Those DPs, those shattered remnants of a European Jewish civilization, the person who wrote this most beautifully is Dr. Dara Horn. She just had this amazing piece about how we remember how Americans remember World War II. Because the American memory of World War II, which was given to you in your schooling, is not the Jewish memory of World War II. Because the Nazis lost World War II, but they won the Holocaust. They won the war on the Jews. The Jews were destroyed. And those DPs that the world still knowing everything there is to know about Auschwitz, didn't want, month after month, year after year, even as their governments plucked out every single Nazi collaborator and every single Catholic and every single Pole and Protestant and Ukrainian, those DPs were 1/4 of the IDF in 1948. What were they fighting for? What did they understand? I don't like ideologies and I don't like elites, because they tend to usually be talking about themselves instead of talking about substance. But go to the ordinary experience of ordinary people. Go to 250,000 DPs who finally land in Israel. When do the DP camps empty out? When do the DP camps finally empty out? That wasn't a rhetorical question. 1948, May. When does Congress update the quotas? June. Exactly. When 2/3 of the DPs are already gone to Israel, then Congress is, in that month, then Congress is willing to consider taking some in. And by the way, the numbers are still very low. Folks, welcome to Israel. Who are we? Who are we? Immediately after 48, the same thing that happened to Europe happened in the Arab world. Not the Holocaust, because now there was somewhere to go. Immediately after 1948, hundreds of thousands of Jews flee the Arab world. Baghdad is almost 25% Jewish in 1930. New York City is about 12% Jewish. And it's Jewish. Imagine how Jewish Baghdad must have felt. In 1952, Baghdad was basically 0% Jewish. Who are we? We are the refugees. We are the Jews who went through history. We are the remnants. How did we respond to that history? You responded to American liberalism's promise coming true by becoming the most liberal people to have ever existed, probably. Maybe college campuses now are beating you a little, I don't know. Depends what liberal means. Not that, I agree. You're still liberal, they're not. Who are we? How do we respond to the 20th century? Hamas thinks that it's going to massacre our children and we're going to run away. And I've had a lot of conversations with Palestinians, and I've written a lot of pieces that were translated into Arabic, for what it's worth, about how we don't know how to run away. You can't get rid of us the way the Algerians terrorized the French out of Algeria. Why? Nowhere else to go is the thing everybody's learning to say now. But I don't just mean we don't have somewhere to go. All we are, what it is to be us, is to be the Jew with nowhere else to go. Hamas committed 24 Kishinevs on October 7th. And what happened to the Jews? Everything got simple. Everything got clear. Everybody unified. Everything else quieted down. Oh, this. We know what this is. This is everything we are. We constructed a society for that. So we don't just not have anywhere to go. We are the Jews who built this place as the last place Jews can go. I have sat in on meetings between Israeli cabinet ministers and left-wing American Jewish organizations. And one time I was privy to an exchange that I just fell madly in love with because it was perfect. I hope I tell it exactly as it was and don't remember it more perfectly than it really was. There's the board of a left-wing American Jewish organization. It's like 7 or 8 years ago. I think J Street, I'm not, maybe it's some other, but similar in politics. And a member of government from Likud. And one of the board members from J Street says, by the way, it's about Gaza. There was some skirmish in Gaza, and the board member from J Street says, and they're talking about settlements, and they say, my fear for Israel is that if Israel isn't a moral country, then it will lose its legitimacy. It will lose its right to exist. I am fighting for Israel when I fight for Israel's morality. And the Israeli government minister said, fuck you. And that was a very deep answer. Both of them were saying deep things. They weren't hearing deep things, but they were saying deep things. What did the American Jew mean? Why does Israel need to be moral to be legitimate or survive? Do you guys come to the Germans and say, hey, if you're not moral, you can't survive, I'm sorry. What does he mean? What's the American Jewish experience?
It means we can't survive.
Folks, liberalism is our redemption. Please understand that ultimately liberalism is the only safe world Jews can live in. We have 140 years of proof. Nowhere else have we ever been as safe or as tolerated or as accepted or as not accepted. Exactly the opposite of accepted. Part. Liberalism is the answer, and there is no other answer. Why would Israel not get that? Why would Israel not be that? What other lesson is there to Jewish history? Is what he was saying. And what was the Israeli saying? What was the Israeli hearing, and what was the Israeli responding? By the way, he was loud. I made it all quiet, dramatic, but he was loud about his. Yes?
Israeli Jews fearing that there will always be a potential reason you might not have a right to exist if you do not live up to certain qualifications in the eyes of the world. He was saying that our right to exist can be questioned because it's intrinsic to who we are. It's intrinsic to these experiences. You can't take these horrific shaping experiences away.
All,
We have to flip up that checklist. It's almost an insult to the memory of all of us.
I think he's saying that the fear of looking bad is risking, is itself a risk to the Jewish state. Like Oldemir said, we'd rather be alive with a bad reputation than dead in pity.
yeah.
I think he's saying that we only have ourselves to fight for.
All we are is the Jew who doesn't ask permission. You do not ask permission to live. Because when you do, you're eventually going to find someone who says no. That's all we are. I'm illegitimate if I'm immoral? You started campaigning for the dismantling of America after Vietnam? What does that even mean? Can you imagine a more genocidal statement than I'm illegitimate if I'm immoral? Are humans illegitimate if they misbehave? Does anybody demand of Germany that it stop existing? To an Israeli, can you say something more anti-Semitic? And all I am is the Jew who doesn't depend on whether you think I'm okay. You American Jews. I'm putting a lot into one little fuck you, right? But you American Jews don't understand, I, the Israeli, think, that your situation is contingent on the others thinking you're legitimate. Maybe that's why you're so constantly moralizing about everything. You're always trying to be okay. That is not healthy. That is not freedom. When you stop caring what they think, that's freedom. When you genuinely stop caring what they think, that's freedom. Both of them are right. Neither of them's an idiot. Both of them have 150 years of Jewish history to show. About 60 of it shared. but they absolutely can't talk to each other. Welcome to the other Jews. Welcome to Israelis. We're going to meet on Sunday, and then we're going to meet on Tuesday? I think it's going to be Tuesday, I'm not sure, but someday next week, that day next week, we're going to talk about what Palestinians think we are. And now we're ready to understand, A, why what Palestinians think we are isn't stupid, and B, what profound thing it misses as they strategize about us for 100 years. I'm done. How you guys doing?